Well, we're going to change it just a tiny bit. I think you all experienced some really great education. Do we agree? I think so. Thanks. And now we're going to take a step back. I think we can all agree on something. I hope. Maybe. I think we can all agree we need more genetics-trained people in our planet. Agree with me? And yet, our programs aren't filling, and we're not sure why. We all know we have the best jobs on the planet, and yet, where are all our next generation colleagues? So when I joined genetics and I fell in love with it, I realized, where are all my friends? Where's everyone else? And it made me go back in time to a long time ago when I realized I was never meant to be a geneticist. I was never meant to be a physician. I have the genes of a teacher. And I realized my mother is a teacher. My father is a teacher. My sisters teach across the hall from each other. So when I go home, do you know what we do for fun? We put up bulletin boards. And I realized genetically, I'm supposed to be a teacher, so maybe I should use my genetics to hopefully improve all of our lives together. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how I've done it really badly for a lot of my life, and how instead of believing my own ideas, I decided to do something crazy, something that all of you in this room have taught me, evidence-based medicine. And I thought, well, maybe there's evidence-based education. That's what we're going to talk about today, what that looks like for all of us. Because maybe if each of us does one more evidence-based education item, maybe that'll help one more person feel a little more comfortable with what all of us have fallen in love with. So when did I come up with this whole idea? Well, it was a long time ago. I had a really pretty, really shiny PhD. It was 2000, and it was a shiny PhD. I knew pathways, and I thought I knew everything. Does anyone remember that place? No one but me. Okay, I'm the only one. And I remember thinking, everyone in my family is a teacher, so I should be able to teach, right? It's genetic. So what did I do? I went to the local community college, and I walked in and said, I am going to teach for you. And they said, no, you're not. And I said, well, what do I have to do? And they said, well, why don't you give it a year or two to come back? So I went back a little while later, and I tried to get a job, and they told me, no, you need some practice. Go away. So I went and I practiced, and then I came back, and I said, I am going to teach for you. And they said, we have one class that someone just quit. Oh, what's the class? Cell biology at 7:40 at night on Mondays and Wednesdays. You want me to teach what? I'm a biochemist. Pathways, beautiful pathways. They're like, no, cell biology. I said, okay, I'll take it. It was in Salt Lake City, Utah, and they had the guts to let me try teaching. So I went to the office that first morning, and they gave me an 18-inch box of overhead transparencies. It was 2000. Okay, raise your hands if you love overhead transparencies. I went to Staples. You know what I bought? Every color of overhead transparency markers that existed. I'm like, I'm going to be a good teacher. I'm going to have color. I was excited. The first day, I wrote a syllabus. I made sure we got through every single transparency in the box. That was my entire syllabus that first semester. It was pathetic. About halfway through, we got evaluations because I was the new teacher. And I got an evaluation, and ironically, they were like handwritten, and I gave essay tests, so I recognized who wrote what. Not anonymous at all. And one of my comments said, she's really nice. We like her. Could someone teach her how to teach? That would be great, because we want to know what she knows. Needless to say, that weekend was not a pretty weekend at my house. I was grumpy. I was mad. I was like, but I'm trying really hard. I bought all the pens. I used all the transparencies. What's wrong? So that Monday when I got to class, I decided to swallow my pride, and I went up to the woman who I knew had written that evaluation. And I looked at her, and I'm like, you know, we've talked before. You're really smart. She was in her late 40s. And she was returning to school after she'd raised 8 kids because she wanted to be a nurse and give back to the world. And I walked up to her and I said, I want to be a better teacher. And she said, let's go have some coffee. And I said, we don't drink coffee at Salt Lake. There is no coffee here. Because there were no coffee shops close to us, so we had lemonade. And I always think it's ironic that we had lemonade because I came into that conversation a little bit bitter, and I left much better. Because it was the first time I remember thinking, if I taught better, she would be a better nurse, and patients would be better off. And I know we've all had that, well, that's not a huge aha moment to anyone in this room, that when we teach better, patients are better cared for. But for me, it was that first indication of I had to be better, not because of me, but because of all of our patients and all of us. Well, fast forward 15 years. It was right in my educational portfolio. Anyone have one of those? Remember that thing where you're supposed to write down everything you've ever taught? And in ours, we have to have our philosophy of education. I remember thinking, well, I have a philosophy of education. I have lots of them, but it didn't fit in the little box. And I happened to be on call that night. It was a Saturday, and there was a little girl who was pretty sick, and I thought, well, maybe I'll just take a break from writing this. So I ran down to the inpatient unit, in the cardiac intensive care unit, and I walked in, and I'm like, how's it going? And Mom was so excited. She's like, she blew a kiss. I know she's okay. And I said, that's awesome. And suddenly it came to me. It's all about blowing kisses, my entire educational portfolio. So we all know what KISS stands for, right? Keep it simple. But I'm going to say keep it simple and salient. If you look at educational literature, it's not about being simple. It's about keeping it simple and applicable. We're not saying we shouldn't tell everyone the complexities of what we do. We don't want people to be underwhelmed by how complex genetics is. That's not the goal. The goal is to make it applicable and to tell them why they care about what we care about. That's teaching. That's keeping it simple and salient at the same time. So you might have heard of Malcolm Knowles. Anyone heard of Malcolm Knowles? He's a fun guy. You know what he says? Adults care about what they care about. That's the take-home message. They want us to tell them, how does this apply to where they live and how they function? That is all of adult educational theory in one line. Keep it simple and keep it salient. Make sure it fits how they view their lives. And give them the information when they need it in the way they need it. So when we think about how do we incorporate information in the most effective way, Chi et al. Came out with this idea of how do we become involved in learning? And how can we make that interaction happen? So we're going to talk about how do we improve interaction and why do we do that? So these are examples of how do we improve interaction. Maybe we use laser pointers in the middle of a dysmorphology lecture. Maybe we have people interact with the literature. All of you out there are somehow interacting with my slide right now, right? You're looking at going, what is that drawing of anyway? And why did you put it up there? Don't worry, it'll come in a second. Maybe you're interacting with your cell phone, looking up Malcolm Knowles right now. There's this great group of studies that talk about the idea of if you can have people interact with that information, not with you as the speaker, maybe not even with each other, but interact with the information, that's how we solidify it. That's how it becomes part of them. And when it becomes part of them, it changes how they live and how they view life. And that's how we teach adults. We make it part of them. So how do we make it part of them? Well, last year I went to the chief residence and I said, I only get 4 lectures. I want more. Anyone here want more lectures from your chief residence? Yeah, we all do. And they said, well, you can't have any more. And I said, well, what would it take for me to get more? And they said, so they really liked that lecture you did where there was no PowerPoint. And I said, what if I did all 6 lectures with no PowerPoint? Would you let me have 6? And they said yes. And I said, oh my goodness, what have I just signed up for? So last year, me and a lot of my friends got together, my poor genetic counselors, those poor people. I've drugged them with me to everything. These drawings are with some of them. And we went and we figured out how to do 6 lectures with no PowerPoint. We taught dysmorphology with laser pointers. So inappropriate, so many levels, but it worked. It's so funny. Just last week, I got a call from a pediatric resident that said, remember when the purple team won with the laser pointer tag? And I'm like, no, but keep going. Well, I have a kid that looks like that. Can you come see them? Like, I wonder what the purple team did, but yes, I'll come see them. They remember the color of the laser pointers. They remember interacting with those pictures. We created a curriculum where we did value-based medicine. We had noticed that every resident wanted an exome because that's what the newspapers say they want. Anyone else had that question? They love exomes, but it's the best test. So we went in and we gave them all a budget and cases and said, spend your money. The team with the most money at the end wins. Suddenly, not everyone got an exome. It's amazing. And we had rare disease dollars, and they had to figure out how to do the right test at the right time and the right way for the right patients. We came up with 6 lectures that were more interactive. And what did it do? It made the residents look at us and think, these aren't the most boring people in the room. These are people that actually care about how we learn and how we want to learn, and that we took the time and energy to do it. When we think about it, what's the most important thing they liked about me in all those 6 lectures that I figured out? We got done on time. It was short. Why was that my priority? How many of you here are on your cell phones? There's someone here. It's okay. I still like you. Okay with it. How many of us go to that lecture and think, are they going to be done in time for lunch? Because we only have an hour. Are we going to make it? There's no reason to go overtime. And then I had to, take my own advice of keeping it shorter than it has to be. I was doing this lecture. They would go to morning report, and then I would have this half-hour time period before they went on rounds. You know that witching hour when everyone wants to look at one more thing? And the med students are all worried because they have to present in 5 minutes? That was my half hour to try to teach them metabolic emergencies. Yeah, that's an effective time. Because no one's there, everyone's distracted. So I tried something. I went in and I said, you know what, everyone take 10 minutes, just look up whatever you need to look up, double check on that patient. Instead of being a 30-minute lecture, I made it a 17-minute lecture. Why 17 minutes? Because that's your attention span anyway. Where do you think TED Style Talks got their idea from? That's the average attention span in this room is 17 minutes anyway. So I thought, well, why would I expect a bunch of distracted residents to have more than 17 minutes for me? Do you know how much more effective that lecture got? Because they actually listened to me for those 17 minutes. And they felt like I'd heard their needs. I met them where they were. Instead of me being this person who's going to come in and tell them a metabolic emergency, which wasn't acutely worrisome to them, it was the seasoned kid down the hall. They respected that I respected them and taught them like an adult. I gave them the salient information when they needed it in a way they could handle it. So maybe think, keep it short. Now, how do you keep things short? You have to stop talking. And yet here I am up here talking. It's so inappropriate, isn't it? So I had a friend come to me and she said, I want a better lecture. And I said, quit talking. And she said, what do you mean? I said, 25% less talking. My new goal is to talk less. I'm sure you're all shocked by that my goal is to talk less. And when I started doing lectures last year, when I did this whole, 6 lectures with no PowerPoint, I realized the less I talk, the better my scores went up. It's ironic. And every time I talk less, they learn more. It's that interaction. It's them taking responsibility for their knowledge and interacting with it. They don't need to hear me. They need to hear me just enough so that they know how to interact with the data in an effective way. And then the last thing that I think that all of us have more than any other field on the planet is the story. How many of you have sat here and heard a great story and that's all you remember when you go home? I do. What are you going to remember from Chris's talk? The twins. You're going to remember the stories. You're going to remember the patches, right? Let's be honest. It's the patch we're all going to remember. Sorry, Chris. I'm not going to remember all his statistics and his exact data. I'm going to remember there were cool patches and something about a meth lab. That's what I'm going to remember, right? But we have the best stories on the planet. And I remember I was putting together a one-day symposium, and I was supposed to go out and teach primary care physicians how to recognize genetic diseases, and felt completely overwhelmed. So I went out, and I'm like, I will use all of my items. I had interaction. They got to use the laser pointers. They talked to each other. We had a patient panel. I had my 3 take-home points, because that's all anyone can take from an hour-long lecture. And I got my evaluations back, and they were lovely. Oh, they liked me. I was so happy. It looked good in my educational portfolio, like a nice little high peak in my EP. It was great. And I thought I'd been successful. About 2 months later, I got a phone call. A pediatrician called me and said, I didn't go to your lecture because I thought it would be boring. Thank you. Thank you for thinking I would be boring. But my friend did, and she said it wasn't. Oh, good. And she said the take-home message was, if there was more than one organ system, we should call you. Well, it was one of my take-home points was that if there was more than one organ system, to consider a genetic syndrome. There, right? I thought it was a pretty good take-home message. And I said, well, tell me more. And she said, well, this little baby had heart failure, but the cardiologist said they were taking care of it, so I was never that worried because I have a cardiologist. But now she won't lift her head or lift her arms. And I realized I need a second specialist, and we should call you. And I said, call Mom and tell her she's coming to see me tomorrow. A week later, we got the test result back. She had Pompe. 2 weeks later, we started treatment. And at the time, I thought, that's why we educate well. Because we didn't miss a little girl with Pompe. That's why that talk and that day and all those crazy time and all of that work we put into that lecture to make it simple, salient, interactive, to have great stories and keep it short, make sure they got their coffee breaks, was so that we would find a little girl with Pompe on time. So when I say educate better, yes, I want us to have more geneticists. We need more geneticists. We have the best job in the world, and not everyone knows that. But why do we need more geneticists? Because we need more little girls that have Pompe. When I called and asked Mom if it was okay if I told this story, she said, sure, and I'll send you a picture. I said, I'd love a picture. And then I got a call on Monday, and she said, I tried to get pictures, but she kept running away from the camera. And I said, that's the picture I want. This is why we educate. Because we want more trainees, we want more passionate physicians and genetic counselors and researchers and lab professionals to remember, why are we all doing this? We're all doing this so that there's more kids that are running away from the camera and trying to get away from all of us, right? So never forget, why do we do things a little bit harder? Why do we take the courage to stop talking? Why do we take the courage to try a new lecture? Why do we take the courage and the time and the energy to do something hard and to read the educational literature, which is much harder to read than basic medicine, I think? Why do we do all that? Because we want kids running away from the camera.